The Bible teaches in Hebrews 9:27, "It is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment." There are no second chances after death, no opportunities to redo things, no extra time to reconsider. If someone were to pass away right now, today, would they know where they'd spend eternity? Jesus didn't reveal these truths to frighten anyone. He shared them out of love. This story is about Brandon, a 52-year-old man from Toledo, Ohio. 3 months ago, Brandon experienced something extraordinary. He died for 6 minutes. What he encountered during those brief minutes might sound unbelievable, but it's a story worth sharing. What Jesus showed Brandon about what happens immediately after death is far different from what most people imagine. It was a Thursday morning in March when this life-changing event occurred. Brandon's wife, Katie, had prepared her famous blueberry muffins that day, and Brandon was running late for his shift at the steel plant where he had worked for 15 years. His routine was the same every day: clock in at 7:00 a.m., operate the press line, and clock out at 3:30 p.m. Brandon wasn't what you'd call a deeply religious person. He believed in God, attended church on Christmas and Easter, and occasionally said grace before dinner. But, if we're being honest, faith wasn't a central part of his everyday life. His mind was often occupied with practical concerns like paying the mortgage or ensuring his truck passed inspection. That particular morning felt different for Brandon, though. He woke up with an odd pressure in his chest. Not exactly pain, but a heavy sensation, as if someone had placed a weight on his ribs while he slept. Katie noticed something was off and asked, "You okay, hun?" Brandon brushed it off, replying, "Yeah, just tired." Looking back, he probably should have listened to her concern and stayed home. Around 11:30 a.m., while working on a large piece of steel at the plant, the chest pressure intensified dramatically. It felt as though someone was tightening a wrench around his heart. Brandon looked around for his supervisor, Danny, but he couldn't get the words out properly. Then, his legs gave way. The last thing he recalled hearing was the machine shutting down and Danny shouting, "Call 911. Brandon's down." After that, there was nothing but silence, complete and utter silence. Here's where things took a strange turn for Brandon. Despite the silence, he could still see everything. He found himself standing next to his own body, which lay on the cold concrete floor of the steel plant. Danny was performing CPR on him, while his co-worker Lisa was in tears. Paramedics rushed in with their equipment, and Brandon watched it all unfold as if he were a spectator at a movie. He glanced down at his hands. They looked normal but somewhat transparent, like looking through glass. Surprisingly, Brandon didn't feel scared. In fact, he felt an overwhelming sense of calm, a peace deeper than anything he had experienced in years. The colors around him seemed more vivid, the sounds softer yet somehow more significant. He could even hear Lisa praying under her breath, something he had never witnessed before. At that moment, Brandon sensed a presence behind him. When he turned, his heart instantly knew who it was. He couldn't explain how, but he was certain it was Jesus. It wasn't the image of Jesus he had pictured in his mind, yet there was no doubt. Jesus' presence filled the entire space, not with a blinding light or dramatic effects, but with a warmth akin to sitting by a cozy fire on a cold night. It felt safe and peaceful. At first, Jesus didn't speak. He simply looked at Brandon with eyes that seemed to know every detail of his life, not with judgment, but with profound understanding. Then, Jesus extended his hand and said, "Come with me, Brandon." His voice wasn't loud, but Brandon felt it resonate deep within his chest, in his very soul. Without hesitation, Brandon took his hand, and in an instant, everything shifted. They weren't walking in the traditional sense. It felt more like floating, but with a clear sense of direction. The hospital scene faded away, and they arrived in a place that was both entirely new and oddly familiar. It resembled the most beautiful library one could imagine, but instead of books, the walls displayed scenes of life, Brandon's life. Every moment, every decision, every word he had ever spoken was there. Jesus spoke again, saying, "I need to show you something important about what happens when people die." Before them, something like a window appeared, not a physical one, but Brandon could see through it as if it were. He saw his own body in the hospital, with doctors still working to save him. Katie was there, holding his hand, tears streaming down her face. Brandon asked, "How long do I have?" Jesus responded gently, "That's not the right question. The real question is, what happens to the soul when the body stops?" What Jesus revealed next completely astonished Brandon. Brandon had always believed that when someone dies, their spirit lingers on earth for a while, perhaps watching over loved ones or getting stuck between worlds. But Jesus corrected this misconception. He explained that the moment physical death occurs, the soul comes directly to him. There's no wandering, no waiting period, no getting lost between realms. To illustrate, Jesus showed Brandon what appeared to be two doors. One was filled with light and peace, while the other was darker, not terrifying, but deeply sad. Jesus explained that every person who dies walks through one of these doors immediately, and the choice depends on one crucial factor. Did they accept him as their savior during their life on earth? Brandon watched as souls approached these doors. Some moved toward the light with joy, while others hesitated before slowly walking toward the darker door. Each soul seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Curious, Brandon asked about the many TV shows and stories of people claiming to communicate with deceased relatives. Jesus' expression grew serious as he replied, "Brandon, this is why I brought you here. People need to know the truth." He then showed Brandon a chilling scene. A woman named Megan sat in her living room, crying over her late husband. She was speaking to what she believed was his spirit, which comforted her with details only her husband would know. But Jesus revealed the true nature of this voice. It wasn't her husband. It was something dark, masquerading as him, exploiting her grief. Jesus explained that Satan and his demons observe people throughout their lives, learning intimate details to deceive those left behind. Brandon saw more scenes unfold, a man receiving messages from his deceased mother, a teenager believing his grandfather was guiding him. All of them were being misled. When Brandon asked why this happens, Jesus answered, "To keep them from seeking me." If they believe their loved ones are still around, they won't prepare for their own eternity. They'll be distracted from the truth. Watching these people broke Brandon's heart. They thought they were finding comfort, but they were being deceived. Next, Jesus took Brandon to see the souls who had chosen the darker door. This wasn't hell, at least not yet. It was a place of waiting, referred to in the Bible as Hades. The souls there weren't being tortured, but they were fully aware of what they had lost. They remembered every opportunity they had to accept Jesus, every conversation about salvation they dismissed, every moment they postponed for later. The sadness in that place was overwhelming, not because God was punishing them, but because they finally understood the cost of their choices. Jesus clarified, "This is temporary. The final judgment comes later." But even now they know their decision was final. One soul in particular caught Brandon's attention. The regret in his eyes was palpable, and Brandon could see his entire story, how he had heard about Jesus countless times, but always thought he had more time. always planned to address it later. He never got that later. Jesus then showed Brandon something even more profound. Time itself, not as hours or days, but as opportunities. Every moment of life is a chance to choose between love and selfishness, truth and lies, Jesus or oneself. Brandon saw forgotten moments from his own life, times he had helped someone without a second thought, and times he'd been unkind and shrugged it off as insignificant. Yet, every single choice carried weight. Every moment mattered. Jesus emphasized that people often think they have endless time, not realizing that every day, every hour, every breath is a gift that can be taken away. Brandon reflected on all the time he had wasted, all the chances to show love that he missed because he was too busy, too tired, or too focused on himself. Tears welled up in his eyes as he thought about his mistakes. But Jesus smiled, a smile of unparalleled beauty, and said, "That's why I died for you, Brandon. Not because you're perfect, but because you're not." Soon, everything began to fade. The light softened, and the voices grew distant. Jesus told Brandon, "I'm sending you back. People need to hear what you've seen. They need to know that death isn't the end, it's the beginning. And they must understand that the choice of where they spend eternity must be made now, while they're still alive." Brandon protested, saying, "But I'm nobody special. I'm just a guy who works at a steel plant." Jesus replied, "Perfect. I don't need special people. I needed willing people." The last thing Brandon remembered was a sensation of being pulled back, as if sucked through a tunnel. He awoke in the ICU with Katie holding his hand. The doctors informed him that he had been clinically dead for 6 minutes and called it a miracle that he returned with no brain damage. But Brandon knew it wasn't just a miracle. It was a mission. The first thing he did was embrace Katie and tell her he loved her. The second was to ask for a Bible. He had a lot of catching up to do. That was 3 months ago, and Brandon's life has transformed completely. He still works at the steel plant, but he views it differently now. Every coworker is someone who needs to hear about Jesus. Every day is another opportunity to make choices that matter for eternity. Brandon and Katie attend church every Sunday, not out of obligation, but because they want to. They read the Bible together each night, learning about the God who loved them enough to die for them. Brandon has begun sharing his story with anyone who will listen. Some think he's crazy, others get upset, but many listen with tears in their eyes, sensing the truth in his words. Just last week, Brandon's coworker Danny asked him to pray together. Right there in the break room, Danny gave his life to Jesus. Brandon couldn't hold back his tears. The message he wants to convey is clear. Death is real, eternity is real, and the decision about where one spends eternity must be made while still alive. Many believe they have time, that they'll address it later. But what if later never comes? Brandon nearly learned this the hard way. As the Bible states in Hebrews 9:27, it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment. There are no second chances after death, no do-overs, no time to think it over. If someone were to die right now, today, would they know where they'd spend eternity? Jesus didn't show these things to Brandon to scare people. He showed them because he loves everyone. He doesn't want anyone to end up in a place of waiting, filled with regret. He desires for all to choose the door of light and peace. But that choice must be made during life. All it takes is to admit one's sins, believe that Jesus died to pay for those sins, and ask him to be the Lord of one's life. It's that simple, yet it's that crucial. 3 months ago, Brandon thought he had all the time in the world, that he could deal with spiritual matters later, when life slowed down. He nearly ran out of time entirely. Some might hear this story and think, I'll consider this later. But what if there is no later? What if tonight is the last night? What if tomorrow never arrives? Brandon urges everyone not to gamble with eternity, not to bet their soul on having more time. The choice is theirs, but it must be made while they still can. He prays that his story, this glimpse into what happens after death, will help others make the most important decision of their lives. Because once the last breath is taken, the decision is final, and eternity is a very, very long time. What will you choose?